There is a quiet arrogance in the way we walk across this planet. We assume the ground beneath our feet is solid, that water flows downhill, that fire cannot burn beneath a waterfall, and that a rock too large to move will simply stay where gravity demands. And then the Earth shows us places that break every one of those rules. Places so strange that even now, with satellites overhead and laboratories full of instruments, no one can fully explain what is happening. Some of these are pits of fire that have burned without pause for more than 50 years. Some are rivers, hot enough to cook anything that falls in, deep in a jungle where boiling water should not exist. Some are stones balanced on the edge of cliffs, defying the pull that governs everything else on Earth. Over the next half hour, we are going to travel to 15 of the most impossible places on Earth. Locations where the laws of nature seem to bend, where beauty and danger sit side by side, and where the honest answer to the question, how is this possible, is still, in some cases, that we do not entirely know.
Contrary to popular belief, the water remains pink, even when isolated from the lake itself, showing it's no optical illusion.
Number 1. Darvaza Gas Crater, Turkmenistan. In the heart of the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, there is a hole in the ground that has been on fire for more than half a century. Locals call it the door to hell. On official maps, it is the Darvaza Gas Crater, and it measures roughly 70 meters across and 20 meters deep, wide enough to swallow a city block, and glowing so brightly at night that travelers can see it from kilometers away. The story goes that in 1971, Soviet geologists drilling for natural gas accidentally collapsed the ground beneath their rig, opening a crater that began leaking methane. Fearing the poisonous gas would spread, they set it alight, expecting the flames to burn out in a few weeks. That was over 50 years ago. It is still burning today. Stand at the edge, and the heat hits you like an open furnace door, strong enough to feel on your face from meters away. The roar of the flames is constant, and the desert around it glows orange after dark. What makes it truly unsettling is that no one knows exactly how much gas is feeding it, or when, if ever, it will run out. Would you camp beside a pit of fire that has burned longer than most people have been alive, in a desert where the nearest town is hours away? For the handful of scientists who study it, this impossible flame is one of the longest continuous fires humans have ever created by accident. Number 2. Eternal Flame Falls, New York, USA. Far from the deserts of Central Asia, in a quiet forest park near Buffalo, New York, there is a small waterfall with a secret hidden behind the falling water. Reach through the curtain of the stream, and you will find a flame, burning steadily inside a hollow in the rock, sheltered from the water flowing over it. This is Eternal Flame Falls, and the fire is fed by natural gas seeping up through cracks in the shale beneath the ground. Hikers keep it alight, and though it occasionally goes out, it is quickly relit and continues to flicker in a place where, by every instinct we have, fire and water should never coexist. What baffled scientists for years is the geology behind it. Most natural gas seeps come from rock that has been heated to extreme temperatures deep underground. But the shale here is relatively cool and close to the surface, meaning the gas is being produced by a process researchers still do not completely understand. It is one of the most accessible geological mysteries in North America, sitting just off a walking trail. The flame is only about 20 centimeters tall, small enough to hold in your cupped hands. Yet it represents something profound, a pocket of the planet quietly breaking the rules of chemistry. Would you hike through the woods to warm your hands on a fire that burns behind a waterfall, a flame the earth keeps relighting from somewhere deep below? Number 3. Encontro das Águas, Meeting of the Waters, Manaus, Brazil. Near the city of Manaus in Brazil, deep in the Amazon basin, two great rivers meet and refuse to become one. For more than 6 kilometers, the dark, coffee-colored water of the Rio Negro runs side by side with the pale, sandy water of the Rio Solimões. Separated by a line so sharp, it looks as though someone painted it across the surface. This is the meeting of the waters, the Encontro das Aguas, and it is one of the most striking natural phenomena in South America. The two rivers flow together yet stay apart because of a precise mismatch in their properties. The Rio Negro moves at around 2 kilometers per hour, at a temperature near 28 degrees Celsius. The Solimões runs faster, 4 to 6 kilometers per hour, and cooler. Their densities differ, their acidity differs, and the result is a boundary that holds for kilometers before the two finally blend. From a boat, you can trail one hand in warm black water and the other in cool brown water at the same moment. Fish gather along the seam where the two worlds meet. It is a reminder that even something as fluid as a river can hold a border with almost stubborn discipline. Would you drift along that line, watching two rivers travel together for kilometers while stubbornly refusing to mix into a single stream? Number 4. Cenote Angelita, Tulum, Mexico. On the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, near the town of Tulum, there is a flooded sinkhole where, 30 meters below the surface, a river appears to flow through the water itself, complete with banks, fallen leaves, and what looks like drifting fog rolling between the trees. This is Cenote Angelita, and the impossible river is one of the strangest optical experiences a diver can have. Cenotes are natural pits formed when limestone collapses to reveal groundwater beneath. In Angelita, a layer of fresh water sits on top of denser salt water, and where the two meet, roughly 30 meters down, a thick cloud of hydrogen sulfide forms, a hazy layer that looks exactly like a riverbank shrouded in mist. Divers who descend through it describe the sensation of sinking into a separate world. Above the cloud, the water is clear. Below it, in the salt water, the view opens again, revealing the dead branches of trees that once grew here before the cavern flooded. For a few surreal moments, you appear to be flying above a foggy river that exists 30 meters underwater. The chemistry is well understood by scientists, but the experience remains deeply disorienting. A river with no current, in a place where rivers should not be. Would you descend into a sinkhole to float above a river of mist that only exists beneath the sea of fresh water above it? Number 5. Underwater waterfall, Limón, Mauritius. Off the southwestern tip of Mauritius, near the Limón Peninsula in the Indian Ocean, there is a waterfall that appears to pour off the edge of the island and cascade down into the deep. An underwater waterfall, seeming to drain the ocean itself. Seen from the air, the illusion is breathtaking. Streams of what look like white and blue water plunge over an underwater cliff, tumbling into a dark abyss. It looks as though the sea is falling through a hole in the world. But this is one of nature's most convincing tricks of the eye. There is no real waterfall. Mauritius sits on a relatively shallow underwater plateau, and at its edge, the seafloor drops away steeply into the ocean depths. Ocean currents drag sand and silt from the shallows toward that edge, and as the sediment spills over the drop-off, it creates the powerful visual impression of water pouring downward. Understanding the science does nothing to lessen the spectacle. From a helicopter above Limón, your brain simply refuses to accept that the ocean is not draining away in front of you. It is a masterpiece of scale and perspective, painted by currents and sand across the floor of the sea. Would you fly over an island to watch an ocean appear to pour off the edge of the world, knowing that the waterfall is real to your eyes, even though it does not truly exist? Number 6. Mosquito Bay, Bioluminescent Bay, Vieques, Puerto Rico. On the island of Vieques in Puerto Rico, There is a shallow bay where the water comes alive at night. Dip a paddle into the black water after dark, and every drop that falls glows electric blue, as though you are stirring liquid starlight. This is Mosquito Bay, recognized as the brightest bioluminescent bay in the world. The glow comes from microscopic organisms called dinoflagellates, single-celled plankton that flash with light whenever the water around them is disturbed. In Mosquito Bay, they exist in staggering numbers, up to hundreds of thousands of these organisms in a single liter of water. The conditions here are almost perfectly tuned. A narrow mouth traps the plankton inside the bay, mangrove forests along the shore feed them nutrients, and the water stays warm and calm. The result is a glow so intense that fish darting through the shallows leave streaks of blue light, like meteors racing under the surface. Scientists still study exactly why some bays glow far brighter than others, and why this particular bay outshines them all. What is certain is that the light is fragile, sensitive to pollution, boat traffic, and changes in the water. Would you kayak across a bay at midnight, watching your every movement trigger a burst of blue fire in the water, in a place where the sea itself seems to remember the light of the stars above it? Number 7. Cenote Angelita, the boiling river, Amazon, Peru. Deep in the Peruvian Amazon flows a river that should not be able to exist. For roughly 6 kilometers, its waters run hot enough to kill, reaching temperatures near 86 degrees Celsius, close to boiling. Animals that fall into it are cooked alive. Local people call it Cenote Angelita, which roughly translates to boiled with the heat of the sun. For years, the boiling river was dismissed by many scientists as legend because it sits hundreds of kilometers from the nearest active volcano. And volcanic activity is normally what heats water to these temperatures. A river this hot, this far from any volcano, seemed impossible. When geoscientist Andres Russo studied it, he found the truth was even stranger. The river is fed by hot springs, warmed by water that travels deep into the earth, is heated by the planet's natural geothermal energy, and then rises back to the surface along fault lines. It is, in essence, an enormous natural hot spring pouring into a jungle river, sustained by heat from far below. Steam rises constantly from its surface. In places, the water is hot enough to brew tea. The stones along its banks are stained by minerals, and the surrounding forest is wrapped in a permanent haze. Would you stand on the bank of a river that steams like a kettle in the middle of a rainforest, where a single slip into the current would be fatal within seconds? Number 8. Lake Natron, northern Tanzania. In northern Tanzania lies a lake that turns living things to stone. Its shores are lined with the calcified bodies of birds and bats, preserved in eerie, statue-like poses. Photographs of these creatures, perfectly frozen, coated in white mineral crust, have made it one of the most haunting places on Earth. This is Lake Natron, and its water is extraordinarily hostile. Fed by mineral-rich springs and baked by temperatures that can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, the lake has a pH that can climb as high as 10.5, nearly as caustic as ammonia. Its waters are saturated with sodium carbonate and other salts, the same kind of minerals the ancient Egyptians once used to preserve mummies. Animals that die in or around the lake are not turned to stone in a single dramatic moment, as the legend suggests. Instead, the highly alkaline water and minerals coat and preserve their bodies over time, leaving them calcified and strangely intact. And yet, against all odds, the lake is not dead. It glows deep red and pink from salt-loving microorganisms, and it is the single most important breeding ground on the planet for the lesser flamingo. Millions of them gather here precisely because the brutal water keeps predators away. Would you walk the shores of a blood-red lake caustic enough to preserve the dead? in a place that is at once a graveyard and the safest nursery in Africa. Number 9. Lake Hillier, the Pink Lake, Middle Island, Australia. Off the coast of Western Australia, on the edge of Middle Island, there is a lake the colour of bubble gum. Not pale pink, not a faint tint, a vivid, opaque cotton candy pink that looks as though someone poured dye into the landscape. Beside it, just meters away, lies the deep blue Southern Ocean, making the contrast almost impossible to believe. This is Lake Hillier, and the most remarkable thing about it is that the pink is permanent. Scoop the water into a glass and it stays pink. Even more strangely, the lake is perfectly safe to swim in despite being extremely salty. For a long time, the source of the color was a genuine mystery. Recent research points to a combination of salt-loving microorganisms, including algae that produce reddish pigments, along with pink-hued bacteria that thrive in the lake's high salt crust. Together, they paint the water its unmistakable shade. But scientists acknowledge the full recipe is still not entirely settled, and the exact balance of organisms continues to be studied. The lake is roughly 600 meters long, ringed by a border of white salt and dark green eucalyptus forest. From above, it looks like a slab of pink glass dropped onto a green island in a blue sea. Would you swim in a lake the color of strawberry milk, floating in water so dense with salt that it holds you up, in a place where even the scientist cannot fully explain the color? Number 10. Naslaa Rock, Taima, Saudi Arabia. In the desert near Taima in Saudi Arabia stands a sandstone block split cleanly in two, as though sliced by a laser. The gap between the two halves is razor-straight and smooth, and each half rests on a small natural pedestal. It is called Naslaa, and it has become one of the most debated rocks on Earth. What draws people to it is the precision of the cut. The division runs almost perfectly vertical, with edges so clean that some observers insist no natural process could have made it. The surfaces are also covered in ancient petroglyphs, carvings of humans and animals left by people who lived here thousands of years ago. Fringe theories claim the cut was made by a lost civilization with advanced tools or even something stranger. But geologists offer explanations rooted in natural forces, a pre-existing fault or weakness in the rock, widened over time by wind, temperature swings that expand and contract the stone, and possibly ancient ground movement. Erosion did the rest, smoothing the faces into the clean split we see today. Still, standing before it, the effect is undeniable. The two halves look deliberately placed, balanced on their pedestals, with the desert stretching behind them. Would you cross the Arabian desert to stand before a boulder split so perfectly that people still argue over whether nature alone could have done it, its surface carved with the images of those who came before? Number 11. Kjeragbolten, Lysefjord. Norway. High above the Lysefjord in Norway, wedged into a crack between two sheer cliff faces, sits a single boulder suspended over a drop of roughly 1,000 meters. There is nothing holding it in place but friction, the pressure of two rock walls squeezing it from either side. Step onto it, and only that ancient grip stands between you and the fjord far below. This is Kjeragbolten, and it has become one of the most photographed and most nerve-wracking natural platforms in the world. The boulder is about 5 cubic meters in size, glacial debris left behind when the ice retreated more than 10,000 years ago. It became jammed in the fissure and has stayed there ever since, held by nothing more than the way it settled into the gap. To reach it, hikers climb for hours across the mountain, then step out onto the stone with the valley yawning open beneath their feet. There are no railings, no ropes, no safety net, just rock, air, and the fjord a kilometer down. What makes it extraordinary is not just the danger, but the calm permanence of it. The boulder has not moved in 10 millennia. It simply waits wedged in the sky. Would you step out onto a rock the size of a small car, held in place only by the squeeze of two cliffs, with nothing but 1,000 meters of open air beneath your boots? Number 12. Golden Rock Kyaktio Pagoda, Mon State, Myanmar. On a hilltop in Myanmar, a massive golden boulder balances on the very edge of a cliff, tilted at an angle that looks like it should have sent it crashing into the valley centuries ago. Perched on top of it is a small pagoda. Pilgrims travel from across the country to press sheets of gold leaf onto its surface, and it gleams in the sunlight like a drop of frozen fire. This is the Golden Rock, part of the Kyaktio Pagoda, and it is one of the most sacred sites in Myanmar. The granite boulder is about 6 meters tall and appears to rest on nothing more than a thin strip of rock overhanging the edge with a gap you can almost see through. According to legend, the boulder is held in place by a single strand of the Buddha's hair, enshrined within the pagoda on top. Geologists point to the physics of its center of gravity and the friction of the rock beneath. Whatever the true explanation, the effect is astonishing. A boulder that looks perpetually on the verge of falling, yet has remained fixed for as long as anyone can remember. By day, pilgrims meditate beside it. By night, it glows under lantern light, seeming to hover at the edge of the mountain. Would you climb a sacred mountain to kneel beside a golden boulder that has balanced on the lip of a cliff for centuries, held, depending on who you ask, by faith or by physics? Number 13. Racetrack Playa, Sailing Stones, Death Valley, California, USA. In the scorching flatness of Death Valley, California, on a dry lake bed called Racetrack Playa, there are stones that move on their own. Some weigh hundreds of kilograms. Behind each one stretches a long, curving trail carved into the cracked mud. Proof that the rock traveled across the desert floor, but no one had ever seen them move. For decades, this was one of the most stubborn mysteries in American geology. The stones clearly shifted position over the years, leaving tracks that sometimes ran straight, sometimes curved, and occasionally even doubled back. Theories blamed powerful winds, hurricanes, even magnetism. But the desert kept its secret, because the rocks only moved when no one was watching. The answer finally came in 2014, when scientists set up time-lapse cameras and GPS trackers. On rare winter nights, a thin layer of water forms on the playa and freezes into sheets of ice just millimeters thick. As the morning sun melts the ice, it breaks into floating panels, and a light breeze, sometimes only a few kilometers per hour, pushes these ice sheets against the rocks, sliding them slowly across the slick mud. The motion is almost imperceptible, just meters over minutes, but it is enough to leave those haunting trails. Would you camp on a cracked desert lake bed to witness stones that glide across the ground on their own, in a place that guarded its secret for nearly 100 years? Number 14. Mount Roraima, Venezuela. Brazil to Guyana. On the borders, where Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana meet, a colossal flat-topped mountain rises straight out of the jungle, its sheer walls climbing hundreds of meters into the clouds. The summit is a world of its own, swept by rain and fog, scattered with black rocks and strange plants that exist nowhere else on Earth. It looks less like a mountain and more like a fragment of another planet. This is Mount Roraima, one of the oldest geological formations on the planet, with rock dating back roughly 2 billion years. It is a tepui, a table mountain, and its cliffs, some rising over 400 meters vertically, kept its plateau isolated for so long that life at the top evolved separately from the lands below. The summit receives near constant rainfall, which has scoured the surface into a maze of black stone, quartz crystals, and small pools. Because the plateau has been cut off for millions of years, many of the species living up there, including unique carnivorous plants and a tiny black frog, are found on that single mountaintop and know nowhere else. Clouds pour over its edges like slow waterfalls, and for much of the year, the summit floats above a sea of mist. It is said to have inspired tales of lost worlds where time itself seems to have stopped. Would you climb into the clouds to walk across a 2-billion-year-old island in the sky, where creatures live that exist on no other patch of ground on Earth? Number 15. Hang Son Doong Cave. Quang Binh, Vietnam. Beneath the mountains of Quang Binh province in Vietnam lies a cavern, so vast it has its own clouds, its own river, and its own jungle growing deep underground. It is large enough to hold a city block of 40-story skyscrapers. This is Hang Son Doong Cave, the largest cave passage on Earth. At its biggest, the main chamber measures more than 5 kilometers long, over 150 meters high, and around 200 meters wide. It is so enormous that in places where the ceiling has collapsed, sunlight pours in and entire forests have taken root inside the cave, complete with towering trees, hanging vines, and animals found nowhere else. Fast-flowing underground rivers carved it over millions of years through the limestone. Perhaps the most astonishing detail is its weather. The cave is so large that when warm outside air meets the cool interior, clouds actually form inside it, drifting between the stone walls like mist trapped in a cathedral of rock. Explorers have described standing in the dark and watching fog roll past columns of stone taller than office buildings. Son Doong was only fully explored in 2009, and much of it remains barely touched. It is a reminder that even now, in an age of maps and satellites, the Earth still hides entire worlds beneath our feet. Would you descend into a cave large enough to swallow skyscrapers, where clouds form in the darkness and a jungle grows where the sun almost never reaches? From a pit of fire that has burned for half a century to a flame hidden behind a waterfall. From 2 rivers that refuse to mix to a river hot enough to boil in the heart of the jungle. From boulders balanced on the edge of cliffs to stones that glide across the desert on their own. From a lake that preserves the dead to a cave so vast it grows its own clouds. Every one of these places is real. Every one can be found on a map, and yet each of them, in its own way, quietly refuses to obey the rules we assume the world lives by. Some we now understand, thanks to patient scientists with cameras, instruments, and years of stubborn curiosity. Others still hold a piece of their mystery, waiting for someone to explain them fully. Perhaps that is the real lesson of these impossible places. The Earth is far stranger, far older, and far more inventive than we tend to imagine as we go about our ordinary days. The ground beneath your feet is not as simple as it seems. Which of these 15 impossible places amazed you the most? Let me know down in the comments. And if you would follow me to more of the strangest corners of our planet, consider subscribing. Because the world is full of places that should not exist, and we are only just beginning.